My girlfriend encourages rude behavior from her son toward her, so Saturday night had started off quietly, but I was already exhausted. The three of us were sitting in the living room, my girlfriend, her son, and me. The television was blaring in the background. No one was watching it, just blinking as we briefly chatted about our day. Her son, only 13 years old, suddenly announced enthusiastically that he wanted to go mountain biking the next morning. I felt a tightness in my chest instantly. Mountain biking isn't my thing, and it's not even the sport. I'm not against the activity, but the trip itself felt like a mini hell. Almost 2 hours driving there, then 5 or 6 hours sitting in the ski resort cafe watching him ski, and another 2 hours on the way back. Honestly, I pictured myself tired, yawning, eating a bland burger at the hostel, and asking myself one question: why had I agreed to this? But he spoke with such genuine joy, as if he were anticipating the best morning of his life. My girlfriend smiled, although I noticed she had no particular desire to go biking with him. She hadn't planned on biking that day, but her son was already making plans. I'll set my alarm for 6:30, pack my things, and we'll leave early so we can hit the open trails. I nodded silently, even though everything inside me was protesting. When she went to her room to go to bed early, I turned to her and said sincerely, "Look, the truth is, I don't want to get up at 6. I have the day off tomorrow, and the idea of driving 2 hours to sit in a cafe for half a day doesn't appeal to me at all." She sighed and looked at me tiredly but gently. "I understand. He just wants to spend time on his bike. It's his passion. If you're struggling, we can work it out." And then he did something unexpected. He quietly got up, went to his son's room, and came back with his phone in his hand. He turned off the alarm and set it for 9:30. "Let him sleep a little longer," she said. "At least this way we won't have to get up at dawn." I looked at her in surprise. "And how will he react?" "He wanted to leave this morning." She shrugged. "Well, he's still a kid. He still needs to learn that the world doesn't always revolve around his plans. After all, I wasn't planning on riding a bike either. And if he really wants to ride, he should wait a couple more hours." I remained silent. Part of me was relieved. 9:30 sounded much better than 6:30. Another part was worried. I knew her son was stubborn. His plan was his plan, and changing it without explanation, especially by secretly setting the alarm, could cause a scandal. We went to bed. I tossed and turned for a while, thinking about the next day. The truth is, I just wanted to have a quiet Sunday. Sleep in, have breakfast, go for a walk, watch a movie. But for her, I told myself, okay, I'll put up with it. The important thing is that she's here. Half asleep, I heard her sigh and turn around. It was as if she was hesitating too, but decided not to talk about it any further. In the darkness, I pictured that cabin again, the noise of the teenagers, the long journey. And although I still didn't want to go, I firmly decided, for her, I would. I didn't know then that the morning would turn into chaos. Screams and words that would echo in my head for several days. Morning arrived as if no one had slept. It was still dark when I heard the first sounds, the soft creak of her door, light footsteps in the hallway. I looked at my watch, 6:32. Even without a phone, without an alarm, she got up. At first, I tried closing my eyes again, but after a minute, I heard voices, his excited tone and a tired, irritated, "Please give me another half hour," from her. My son turned on the hall light, and a thin strip beneath the door shone, as if mocking our attempts to rest. She went outside and turned it off. A minute later, click, she turned it back on. "Give me half an hour," he repeated. I heard him mutter something unintelligible, but his voice betrayed irritation. Half an hour was nothing to a kid who'd been making plans all morning. I rolled over again, covering my head with the pillow. I wanted to ignore them, but they wouldn't stop. A couple of minutes later, she came back into the room, but there was no silence. Now her phone was vibrating every few seconds. First a beep, then another, then a third. I sent her texts one after another, like a barrage. "Mom, get up. Mom, we'll be late. Mom, let's go." She responded slowly, trying to convince him with words like, "Later, give me a little time, not now." But the longer she delayed, the more active he became. I lay there listening to her phone vibrate against the nightstand, like someone deliberately banging a spoon against metal. I felt a heaviness. This wasn't just mother and son. It felt like a fight, one side yelling, and the other giving in with each passing minute. Soon the fists began to move. First a timid knock on the door, then every 30 seconds like a metronome. Knock, pause, knock, pause. She tried to ignore him, but he was relentless. I felt everything inside me tense, anger and helplessness mingling. It lasted about 20 minutes. 20 minutes in the middle of the night, when I could have been asleep, but instead I heard the door creak from another punch, the vibration of his phone, and his soft whisper, "Please, let me." Finally, I couldn't stand it any longer. I got up, sat on the bed, and said in a loud, hoarse voice, "It's too early for this kind of nonsense." He stood up immediately. He didn't even look at me. He went to find his clothes. And he, sensing the sign that victory was near, launched an attack. His voice echoed in the hall. "Shut up! Go to hell! You're a fucking idiot!" I froze. Those words sounded like he wasn't a child, but a grown man who'd lost control. And the worst part was, she didn't even argue. She was just trying to calm him down, continuing to pack, and he was cursing like it was normal. I stood in the bedroom doorway watching it all, feeling anger and exhaustion growing inside me. I didn't want to be part of this spectacle. I didn't want to go with them and listen to this for another 5 hours in the car. I turned around and said to him, "I won't go today." He stopped and looked at me. A flash of anger flickered in his eyes. Not bright, but dull, as if I had betrayed his expectations. He didn't respond, just went into the bathroom and turned on the shower. And from the hallway I could still hear, "Faster, come on, get in the shower. You're an idiot." I grabbed my jacket and headed out. On the stairs, I felt a lump in my chest, and a thought swirled around in my head. I don't have to put up with this. The stairwell smelled cold and metallic, like a train station in the early morning. I descended, hearing my footsteps echo off the walls, and thought about how every family has its own sound. For some, it's laughter in the kitchen. For others, soft music from the bedroom. For us that morning, it was knocks on the door every 30 seconds and the whisper of a phone that vibrated constantly. I closed the door behind me, inhaled the air, damp, clean, empty, and only then realized how much I needed to get out. I got in the car, but I didn't start it right away. I had my palms pressed against the steering wheel, as if asking for permission, but I couldn't give it. I felt ashamed, and at the same time, a strange calm. I didn't have to go where I didn't want to go or endure what alarmed me, but I had promised. Yesterday, I heard myself say, okay, we'll go later. That okay wait on me now, like a bad sign about a closed store. I started the engine and left without a plan. The city hadn't woken up yet, the shops were empty, and it was rare to see a bus with its sleepy drivers. I stopped at a 24-hour corner cafe, had a black coffee, and sat by the window. Outside, it was early Sunday, the time when the streets don't yet know what they'll be like at noon. I stared into my cup and mentally replayed how quickly everything had happened. Saturday night, I don't want to get up at 6. Let's do it at 9:30. The morning, the light in the hallway, ping, 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 knock, 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 cursing through the thin door. I caught myself feeling angry not just at my son. I'm angry at her for taking the phone out of his room, for starting the day with a maneuver that went from, let's make his morning easier, to let's blow it up. I'm angry at myself for nodding in relief yesterday, instead of sitting down next to her and saying, look, this isn't going to work. Let's talk to him honestly. I chose silence because silence seemed cheaper, and now I'm paying the price. The coffee was getting cold too quickly. I opened my phone and checked my chat. Nothing from her, from him, yesterday's emojis, and a link to a motorcycle stunt video. The emptiness in the conversation resonated as clearly as a knock on the door in the morning. I didn't write before. I was afraid any message would sound like an excuse, and I didn't have the strength or the desire to make excuses. A tightness churned in my chest. What if we've been living with different schedules for too long? I'm one of those who loves agreements, calm mornings, pre-established plans. I live on sudden starts, explosions. Go! And immediately, we collided like two commuter trains on parallel tracks. Close, noisy, but always heading in opposite directions. I took a couple of sips and remembered how he told her to be quiet. I'm not one to encourage other people's children. I don't believe in moralizing sermons from unknown men. But I suddenly realized that if they'd told me that, I wouldn't have been able to stay, not out of pride, because that kind of talk cuts right to the bone. In my family, they didn't talk like that. They yelled yes, sometimes. They argued loudly, but not like that. And it was a new language, one I didn't want to learn. I kept driving, just for the sake of driving. I turned on the radio, and on the morning radio, someone was making a dull joke about donuts. I turned it off. The car moved forward like an empty shopping cart, and I thought, why had I agreed to this ride? Because I wanted to be with her, yes. Because I believed it was part of the being in a relationship with a person with a child package. But maybe the package doesn't mean patience, but honest boundaries? Is it normal to see a child tell his mother, you're stupid, or men shrug? Is it normal to buy tickets for a day that started like this? I stopped on the seawall, where at that moment there were only joggers and dogs. I reclined my seat, closed my eyes, and tried to imagine how I could have done things differently. If yesterday, instead of rescheduling the alarm, she had gone up to him and said, we're leaving at 9:30, because adults are alive too. If you want, you can come with us. If not, we can reschedule for another day. If in the morning, after the first 3 knocks, he had opened the door and said, you can't talk to me like that. Not today. If I hadn't kept quiet. The phone trembled in my hand. A moment of hope. Her number. A notification from the bank app. I chuckled. Modern worries. I checked it. Looked at her name in my contacts list. I clicked and immediately removed my finger. Typing, I left because she's not well, seemed both true and pointless. She knows she's not well, but it lives on inside her. That's how it is. And changing that on a Sunday, barefoot on the bathroom mat, cursing the light switches, is impossible. I went for a second coffee. The barista asked me, what kind of syrup? I said no, and I thought, this is us. We're already in the no syrup phase. No embellishments, no sweet nothings, no saccharine excuses, just black. When I got back to the car, I finally wrote, briefly, I'm gone. I needed to get out of this situation, ready to talk tonight when everyone has calmed down. I deleted ready and typed can. I deleted can and simply typed talk tonight, sent 1 second, minutes, nothing. I drove home, took off my jacket, and sat in silence for the first time in a long time. No TV, no notifications. I listened to the ticking of the wall clock and tried to untangle my own knots. I'm not a hero or a martyr. I'm just a man who woke up early in a house where the screaming started way too early. I didn't go, even though I promised. Yes, I broke my word. And yes, I was saved. 2 truths in 1 sentence. Around noon, I caught myself in an automatic movement. I started clearing the dishes, clearing the table, opening the window, as if I wanted to vent the morning, even on the walls. I thought of him. 13 is a strange age. You're no longer a child or an adult. You're all wit and urgency. You love your job as if the world depended on it, and maybe any delay feels like an attack to you. But what's abnormal is that I can shout, shut up, in the face of a woman trying to say, give me half an hour. Abnormal and dangerous. Because the next step isn't words, but a hand. And I can't just stand idly by and say, well, he's just a teenager. I caught myself wanting to write to him directly. Hey, listen, you can't do that. But I'm not his father, not even his stepfather. I'm someone trying to be there for his mother. And in that role, the direct line between adult and child can become a minefield. I don't want to be another voice yelling at him, another door he slams on with his fist. If I ever say, don't talk to your mother like that, it shouldn't be out of an adrenaline rush, but out of respect. And right now we have no bridge, just a narrow plank across the water. At dusk, the phone finally rang. I'm angry, she wrote. No greeting, no softening. You promised. I stared at those 2 sentences for a long time. They were true, and yet they said nothing about what was behind the door. I replied, I didn't leave because of the trip. I left because of how they spoke to us. I'm not going after being told to shut up and you're stupid. I need us to talk about this. And I want you to know, I'm not against your sport. I'm against normalizing mornings like this. I texted, I sat, I waited. He wrote slowly. He always says that. It's like that. It'll pass. I inhaled and exhaled. There it was, the sentence that made my stomach turn. It's like that. It's like that is like, the rain is like that, wet. And if it rains wet, carry an umbrella. Where is our umbrella? Where are your limits? Where are mine? I wrote, I'm having a hard time accepting that this is just the way he is. I need people to stop saying that around me. And I need you not to be on the receiving end of it every time. I can help with some things. I can choose not to help. I can leave if that's what needs to be done. But I won't stay and pretend this is normal. Period. Pause. I need to think, came 10 minutes later. Okay, I replied. Night fell quickly, like a curtain. I lay down and listened to the house for a long time. It creaked peacefully, as if no one had shouted in it that day. I thought the morning would show if we had a common language beyond jokes, and whatever happened, so be it. I wanted to believe we would find a way to separate bicycles from devaluation, plans from assaults, love from the silent acceptance of pain. Before falling asleep, I felt a strange sensation, as if for the first time in a long time, I had done something that wasn't right, but that my own skin could bear. It wasn't heroism nor escape, simply the decision to live this day without anyone's wrath on my breath. And perhaps this is also important, not only for relationships, but also for the person who looks in the mirror every morning and asks, are you sure you haven't betrayed yourself? The next day, the silence between us thickened, as if the air were saturated with something unspoken. The morning passed without a message. I pretended to be working, but found myself rereading our correspondence, trying to decipher where exactly our agreements ended and our expectations began. At lunchtime, I wrote to him myself. No pressure, no so what. A simple, if you want to talk, I'm here. An hour later, he replied, at 7 at that cafe on the corner. He arrived before me, already holding a cup in both hands, the way you warm your fingers when you're cold inside. His face was uncovered, his hair tied back, his eyes tired. We greeted each other cautiously. No hugs, none of the typical jokes to ease the pain. We sat in silence for a couple of minutes, and then he said without looking up, I know what it looked like, and I'm ashamed, but I feel like I have no influence anymore. Every time I have to choose, either the scene or giving him what he wants, I choose whichever ends faster. I nodded silently. I didn't want to lecture someone who spent their mornings going door to door about boundaries. It's easy to say the words when you're not the one receiving the call every 30 seconds. I don't mind his bike, he said quietly, but I'm not going on a single day that starts with shut up, even if I promised. I wouldn't be able to stand the road after that, and I don't want to explain to my inner world that this is normal. He squeezed the paper cup so hard that the lid cracked and suddenly exhaled. He talks like this, not just in the morning. A lesson fails, a trick doesn't work, a shirt goes missing, and that's it. For a long time, I thought it was just age, hormones, a transition. And then I realized it had become a language, mine too. I learned to respond with silence. We fell silent. Someone at the next table was laughing loudly, and the barista was shouting over the coffee grinder. Life went on as if nothing had happened. I said, I want to stay in your life. I'm ready to drive, wait, sit in the box, even learn the names of all these tracks. But I need us to have rules. I don't pretend to be your father, but I am a grown man who lives nearby. And I won't be around where swearing is a way to get what you want. If I hear it in the morning, I'm gone. If it happens again, I'm not gone. Not out of punishment, but out of self-care. She nodded as if testing the words and feeling they weren't oppressive. Then she looked up. Do you think we need help? I think, I answered truthfully, that sometimes a third person helps us hear what we can't hear together. A family counselor, a teen psychologist. Not to fix anyone, so that we all develop a different language. She smiled crookedly. You're saying the right thing, but I live in a house where anything right is drowned out by the first word stupid. I'm afraid if I stop smoothing things over, everything will fall apart. It's already cracking, I said quietly. And you know it. She nodded. We finished our coffee. As we left, I offered to walk her home, but she shook her head. I want to walk alone. For the first time in a long time, we said goodbye without hugging, but deep down, I didn't feel a failure, but rather a perfect plan. Our steps finally had a direction. That night, he sent her a link to a consultant. She's booked us in for an introductory session on Wednesday. I replied, thanks, and after a pause, really, thank you. She gave it a heart, and that was enough. Wednesday started nervously. Before the meeting, we sat outside his house to catch our breath. He slammed the door, loudly dropped his backpack, and walked past without even looking at me. His movements were everything. Defiance, a demonstrative, don't tell me what to do. I wanted to say something, but I held back. This wasn't our scene. We went alone. During the consultation, we sat at either end of the couch, leaving a space between us, as if the invisible conflict was meant to be there. The middle-aged woman listened calmly. When I described the morning, the knocking, the swearing, she wasn't surprised or wide-eyed. She simply nodded and asked, where does your fear reside right now? In your head? In your chest? She smiled slightly. The question was strange, and touched her collarbone. Right here. It's like it's shrinking. And what do you respond to that fear? First I say, please. Another half hour. Then I fall silent. Then I do what he wants. And you? The consultant turned to me. I'm leaving, I said, feeling the familiar weight on my shoulders again. I know how to leave before the arguments start. It's both my skill and my cowardice. She wrote something in her notebook and said, they both have the same way of dealing with the situation. They disappear. One fulfilling the child's wish, the other through the door. And there's no one in between. And the child senses it. And he turns up the volume so at least someone will appear. Anyone, even anger. I wanted to argue, but it was exactly what I wanted. After the meeting, we sat in the car in silence. Not because we were tired, but because something inside us was changing. He wants to come back tomorrow, he said. Starting at 9:30, I gave him advance notice. He nodded, but I noticed he was getting tense. Let's do it this way, I suggested. If the swearing starts in the morning, the trip is canceled. Not as a punishment, as a rule. And we both put up with it. If the swearing doesn't start, we leave. I'll wait as long as it takes, eat any burger, and not say anything about the calories. But if they tell me to shut up, we stay home. He'll hate me, he sighed. For an hour, I said. And and then he'll learn where the line is. You don't want cursing his mother to become his master key to every door, do you? Even the ones I'll be on. Morning came quietly, as if afraid of making a sound. At 9:10, he appeared in the hallway. He looked at the slippers by the door, then at us. He said reservedly, "Shall we go?" We both nodded. For 10 minutes, not a single hurry up, not a single flicker of light. She had already relaxed her shoulders when he, putting on his hat, murmured, "Don't play dumb. Move along." And then she didn't lose her temper or pretend she hadn't heard. She said calmly, "We drive when you speak to me respectfully. Try again." He rolled his eyes dramatically. An old shadow crossed the room. I held my breath. And then, as if remembering something, he blurted out, "Okay, let's go, please." The word please sounded so foreign in his mouth that we both almost smiled. The journey passed without incident. I found a corner at the checkout with a view of the exit and drank an indefinable coffee. She flipped through the news, occasionally raising her head to see her silhouette on the tarmac. We barely spoke. The silence wasn't distant, but comforting. Sometimes it's enough to sit next to each other without complicating things. He leaned back in the back seat, put on his headphones, and recorded something on his phone. Probably the tricks he'd performed. Halfway there, he suddenly leaned forward. "Thanks for coming." He looked at me in surprise. I nodded slightly, even though he wasn't looking at me. It was a simple thank you without apologies or apologies. And perhaps the first nail in the coffin the three of us would have to build for a long time. That night, I brought home a cake from that same cafe. We were eating it in the kitchen, and she asked me, "Did you stay because everything happened in silence?" "I stayed because you stood your ground," I replied, "and because I saw in your pleas a weak attempt at being a man you could negotiate with." She smiled tiredly, relieved. We didn't talk about anything else that night. The body remembers better than words. If the day starts without a shut up, it doesn't end with guilt. I lay in bed and thought about how many Sundays await us, and not all of them will be peaceful. But now we have at least one tool in common: not disappearing, not giving up the whole day just so the silence will arrive 5 minutes earlier. And if this matures into a relationship, it doesn't smell like heroism, but like the warm cardboard of a cup of coffee and the word please that's just beginning to sound. The next few days were like thin ice. We walked carefully, trying not to relive that terrible morning, but it loomed over us. Any detail, a light switch, a doorbell, a cup left on the table, could become a trigger. I found myself listening to each of his footsteps in the hallway, waiting to hear the tone he would use when speaking to my mother. She, for her part, seemed to be learning again, not to give up or give in to momentary pressure. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. There were nights when he'd come home irritated, throw his backpack on the floor, and start hurling harsh words. I'd grit my teeth, but she'd calmly stop him. "This isn't working. Say it another way." He'd snort, but more and more often he'd retreat to his room instead of continuing the fight. Small steps, almost imperceptible, but there they were. I learned too. I learned not to butt in where it didn't belong, but also not to pretend everything was okay. If he said, "Hurry up, silly," I'd get up and leave the room. No yelling, no scene. I'd just leave. It was my silent no. And oddly enough, he began to notice. One day he asked her, "Why does she always leave?" She replied, "Because you talk to us like that." He shrugged but remained silent. Our afternoons gradually calmed down. We went back to watching movies, cooking, and talking about work. But somewhere inside me, the anxiety lingered. I knew that one good day doesn't change the system. The system will always find a crack to show its teeth. That's what happened the following Saturday. He wanted to go skating again. This time we had agreed in advance, start at 10, no early risers. She warned him, "If there's any shouting or swearing in the morning, we're not going." He rolled his eyes but said nothing. The morning started pretty well. He arrived in the kitchen sleepy, but not overeager. He drank some juice and grabbed his backpack. Just as we were getting ready to leave, he remembered he hadn't charged his bike light and started to get restless. The cable was missing. The outlet was occupied. He was rummaging through the drawer and suddenly shouted, "Where the hell is that cable?" The word came out of his mouth automatically, as if he were breathing. We both froze. She looked at me, then at him, and she said calmly, "That's all. We're not leaving." He turned around and opened his eyes wide. "What? It's just a word." "Exactly," she replied. "And it was precisely because of simple words like these that we stayed home last time. If you want to ski, learn to hold your tongue. Today we're staying home." And then the storm began. Shouting, slamming doors, accusations. "You're ruining everything. You don't care about my plans." I clenched my fist but didn't intervene. She held on until the end. She sat down at the table, turned on her laptop and said, "I'm busy." Half an hour later, the house fell silent. He retreated into himself, and we sat in silence, like after a hurricane. I approached and put my hand on his shoulder. He was trembling, but he smiled. For the first time, I actually finished it. "You did more than any trip," I replied. That night, she left the room with a defeated look on her face, but said quietly, "Mom, I'm sorry. No drama, no demonstrations." She nodded. I didn't say anything. I just went into the kitchen to give them space. It was at that moment that I realized maybe we still had a chance. Not because he'd suddenly changed, but because she'd finally chosen herself. And if she could choose herself, she could choose us too. We sat down to afternoon tea and she said, "Thanks for leaving then. It was painful, but I guess that's what kept me going. If you had stayed and endured it all, I'd still be putting out fires with a wet rag. But now, at least I can grab a fire extinguisher." I smiled. "You are stronger than you think. And for the first time in a long time, I believed we could achieve this. Not immediately, not perfectly, but step by step." The final conversation didn't happen when we planned it, but on a normal evening. The three of us were sitting in the kitchen. She was chopping salad. I was checking my phone. He was twirling a fork. The atmosphere was unexpectedly calm, as if everyone had grown tired of the storm and decided to take a break. And suddenly he said, "Mom, I was an idiot." The words came out clumsily, awkwardly, but sincerely. She froze, knife in hand, and then slowly placed it on the board. I looked at him without sarcasm, without familiar challenge. Just a confession, wrung out with difficulty. "Thanks for telling me," he replied softly. She blushed, looked away and added, "I just want to skate. It's all I have. When I get held back, I lose everything. But I didn't mean to, like that." There was a pause in the room. She came closer and put her arm around his shoulders, but he didn't move away. I felt a shift inside me, as if the three of us were finally aligned. I said, "You know I can sit in that box as long as I want. I can listen to you talk about your tricks, even if I don't understand a thing. But I can't be here if every morning starts with insults. This isn't sport, it's respect." He nodded without argument, and that nod was worth more than any agreement. After dinner, we were left alone. She looked tired, but a sweetness had appeared on her face that I hadn't seen in a long time. "I was afraid you were going to leave," he admitted. "When you got ready and left, I thought it was the end." "It wasn't the end," I replied. "It was the beginning of a conversation we'd been putting off." She hugged me tightly, as if to check that I was still there. Mornings at home have changed since then. They're not perfect, they're not magical. He's still a teenager with his outbursts, but the words "shut up" or "stupid" no longer come so easily. Now they have consequences: canceled trips, ruined plans, and he knows it. We started hanging out more often. Sometimes I sat on the courier, sometimes I walked around the neighborhood. He laughed when he said he already recognized some of my parents' faces, and it was true. I had become part of this world, albeit from a different perspective. Sometimes he'd revert to his usual outbursts, but now if I got up and walked to the door, he'd stop and mumble, "Okay, sorry." A small but true miracle. One night when the three of us were watching a movie, she leaned toward me and whispered, "Thank you for choosing yourself then, because in doing so, you also chose us." And I realized, yes, I wasn't perfect. I broke my promise and left amidst chaos. But that very step became the starting point for building new rules. Not convenient or quick, but fair. Now every morning is different for us. Not perfect, but vibrant. With breakfast, occasional smiles, and the phrase, "Shall we go?" That sounds more like a question than a command. And I know there are difficult days ahead, but now we have a tool, saying no when before everyone just gave up. And this is the best yes I can think of for our relationship.